Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Shakespeare, where I talk about Shakespeare from a contemporary American perspective. And it's been a couple of months since I've done one of these videos, as evidenced by the magnificent squirrel that now grows on my face. So today what I want to talk about is insiders and outsiders in Shakespeare's canon, and how outsiders choose to behave in order to navigate their status as an outsider in Shakespeare's plays. And what I mean by outsiders in this context is people who are in an underprivileged position. For whatever reason, they're not part of a privileged group in their society, such that they have to take extra measures if they want to be fully accepted for who they are and for what they want to do. So I want to start today talking about gender, because in the societies that Shakespeare writes about, women have to go through a lot of extra hurdles if they want to be able to fully realize who they would like to be. And I want to talk about a few women in particular and what they do in order to be able to accomplish what they want to accomplish. So something that's interesting about women in many of Shakespeare's plays is that if they want to do something other than a traditional female role, basically they have to pretend to be men. And a couple of examples include, As You Like It, you have Rosalind and Celia who have to dress as men in order to safely get through the woods. And another example is Viola from Twelfth Night, who after a shipwreck finds herself alone, virtually alone, on the shore of Illyria, and she wants to be able to fit into this new place. But since she is a young woman, she realizes that if she were to make her own way in the world without a man with her, she really would have to become a man herself. And then finally, in The Merchant of Venice, which we'll talk about in a couple different contexts today, you have the character of Portia, who is actually, in some respects, a very privileged member of society. She's very wealthy, she is renowned for her beauty and for her eligibility as a bachelorette, and yet, if she wants to be able to save her fiancé's friend Antonio, she needs to, surprise, dress as a young man and pretend to be a lawyer in order to get Antonio free from the clutches of Shylock. And that's a very interesting thing, that we see these multiple women in multiple plays who, in order to be able to live out what they want to live out, simply can't do it as women. And the easiest course is to simply not present themselves as women. And then you have other examples, like, for instance, Catherine in The Taming of the Shrew, who, when she behaves the way that is not expected for a young woman, she is vilified for it, and basically, over the course of the play, gets squashed until she finally gives in and consents to be the wife, the woman that she is expected to be. So in either of those cases, either you've got the Viola and the Rosalind and the Portia versus the Catherine, and in both of those cases, you have Shakespeare acknowledging that in these societies, women need to behave as women, and if they don't want to, they need to present themselves as men, and I find that very interesting. The next thing I want to talk about is the idea of religion, specifically through the lens of the play The Merchant of Venice, which I mentioned previously. In The Merchant of Venice, you have the character of Shylock, who is set apart from most of society because he is a Jew. And Shakespeare chooses to set up Shylock to be clearly the villain of the play. Shylock is an outsider, and Shylock is an outsider because of his religion. And we have two different examples of major Jewish characters who respond to their outsider status in very different ways. Shylock, who is a villain, who doesn't necessarily want to be treated as a villain and says that he acts as a villain because he's treated that way by the Christians, gives a full-throated defense of his own humanity in the very famous "Hath not a Jew eyes" speech, but ultimately, in the end, does not want to become not Jewish. That's such an essential part of his personhood and his existence that he does not necessarily repent being Jewish. That cannot be said of his daughter, Jessica, who wants to repent against her Jewish life and become a Christian in order to be able to fit into society and marry the man who she loves, who is a Christian. And so we see those two very different responses. The Jew who does not want to repent being a Jew because that is very important to him, and his daughter who realizes she cannot live the life that she wants to live as this outsider in society. And so I find that very interesting that Shakespeare gives us those two different examples within the same play of outsiders navigating their outsider status. What's also particularly interesting in The Merchant of Venice, in addition to all of this, is how heavily structured society was to prevent the outsiders from becoming insiders. Even the courts themselves. And at the end of the play, when Shylock goes to trial, there's even language written into the law that because Shylock is an alien by being a Jew, that he is beholden to a different set of expectations than the rest of society. So society is not just culturally structured against people who are different, but it's actually legally structured that way as well. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about race. Just like you have in The Merchant of Venice, you have two Jewish characters who navigate being Jewish in very different ways and how they get around in society. In Shakespeare's canon, you have a couple of different characters to look at, and I want to focus in specifically on Othello, which is not surprising. Othello is a very well-known play, but also the character of Aaron in Titus Andronicus, both of whom are described as Moors, but they navigate that in different ways. Aaron in Titus Andronicus fully gives over to that stereotype of the Moor. Aaron is totally 100% full bore into being the bad guy. He even gives a very impassioned speech at the end of the play about how villainous he is and how much he would wish to do even more villainy were he not about to be killed. And then you get Othello, who's completely different in certain respects. Othello, unlike Aaron, seems to want to fit into society. Seems to want to, if you will, earn a place as a privileged member of this society from which he is separate because of the color of his skin. So what does he do to do that? Well, he does amazing things on the battlefield. He's a renowned soldier, and he works his way up the ranks to become a general. And he is well regarded as a general in this play. But then further, he goes further and ends up marrying a white woman, Desdemona. And so in certain respects, he is very much in this privileged position of being a member of this society that is an insider. He's a general, so he has status. He's married a white woman. And yet, despite this, despite proving himself, there is a critical level of distrust of him because of his outsider status as a Moor. And it is used quite impressively by Iago to bring Othello down. And what I find really fascinating is that for all of the effort that Othello puts into being an insider, by not showing himself to be the stereotype of the rash black man, the treatment of him by Iago and the way Iago is able to turn everybody against him basically ends up making Othello into the stereotype that he was trying to avoid being. And to kind of take these things together, I find it really interesting that, you know, those characters who are able to basically pretend to be something they are not are often able to, that can fully mask it, for example, can navigate society to a certain extent. Viola can for a time. Portia can when she needs to. Rosalind and Celia, you know, do successfully convince some people that they're men and navigate it. Jessica, as far as we can tell, is able to successfully convert to Christianity. But folks like Catherine in The Taming of the Shrew, and folks like Othello in Othello ultimately get squashed into becoming the stereotype or the expectation of who they appear to be. And so it's really a pretty bleak view of what it means to be an outsider in Shakespeare's canon, that characters have to work extra hard just to get equal treatment by their societies if they are an outsider. And even then, when they do, unless they're able to mask their outsider status, it just doesn't work, and they fail in the end. So now I want to take that idea and bring it to today. We have insiders and outsiders today in contemporary America, and of course, many of the things that made somebody an outsider in Shakespeare's canon also makes people an outsider today. We don't like to think about it, but gender, religion, and race still today put people into an outsider position in our contemporary American society. And people who fall into that category, just like in Shakespeare's canon, have to work extra hard to be taken seriously, have to work extra hard just to be treated equally in our society, and can never really shake the fact that they are in this outsider status. They have to apologize for who they are, or they have to pretend to be somebody else, that they cannot be fully themselves and be fully accepted the way, to be frank, someone like me can. It just goes to show how much human nature has not changed, and how Shakespeare was able to write these characters, write these societies, and write these situations that can resonate across time because they are so tied to human nature, and how we form insider groups and outsider groups, and how hard it is to get to the inside from the outside, unless you're really able to fundamentally change who you appear to be to those who are on the inside. So I hope this is meaningful to you. I hope this gives you something to think about. If there's something I've missed, if there's something I have misquoted or misstated, or if you would just like to add to the conversation, please comment below. I'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation there. So thanks for watching. Have a great day.